Te reo ererangi o te mānia. This episode was produced in Otatahi by Plains Media, with support from New Zealand On Air.
You've heard the dragons roar. Now it's time to hear the ocean's answer. Welcome back to Avis's next adventure, the continuation of Avis and the Promise of Dragons. I'm Audrey Worsley, your guide into the deep. This is Avis and the Call of the Kraken by Healther McQuillan, published by Ahoy, an imprint of the Cuba Press in 2024. Ready? Hold your breath. The sea is waking. Before she had dedicated herself to science full-time, Melinda had been a high school teacher, and Noah and Margie Papaloo had been her students. Standing beside the boat in the car park behind Papaloo's dairy, Mr. Papaloo kept calling her Ms. Child, even though Melinda kept insisting on Melinda. "I was a terrible teacher," she confessed to Avis. "Not so bad," said Mr. Papaloo. He seemed delighted to be able to do her a favour and even more delighted to show off his boat. He peeled back the tarpaulin to reveal a shiny aluminum fishing boat. The name Noah's Ark was painted on the sides. They climbed up to see the inside. There were 4 seats, 2 comfy ones at the front by the steering wheel and 2 made from storage boxes with flat cushions on top. And Mr. Papaloo showed them how the 2 extra seats could be folded down at the back. Then he got to telling them about the hydraulic steering and 4-stroke outboard motor and the fish finder that worked on sonar. Melinda waited until he was finished before she asked if he knew Makanui Island. "Sure, good fishing around there. Plenty of mako," he grinned, and Avis realised he was talking about sharks. "Just small ones," he added. "Good for eating, not for eating you." He was surprised Melinda had permission to visit the island. It was known as a place where visitors were not welcome. "And there's a tricky bit of reef around it," he said. "But I'll check the maritime map. I could drop you off and then go fish on the trench on the other side," he explained. "When do you want to go?" "Tomorrow suits me. It's Mrs. Papaloo's shift in the dairy this weekend. Lulu can help her out." "Or," said Lulu, who had snuck on them quietly, "Lulu could make her own decisions and come fishing." She gave Avis a low sideways wave. "I'm pretty useful on a boat." Mr. Papaloo's laugh sounded more like stones shifting underwater. "This is my, niece, Lulu," Mr. Papaloo said, "and for once she's being humble. She's a champion fisher and grew up on a boat, so she can surely teach us a thing or two." "Okay, tomorrow then. The tides are right at 6 a.m. "Too early for you, Ms. Child?" "Not at all," said Melinda. "Shall we meet here at 5:30? And Noah—" "Call me Melinda." 5:30 in the morning?" said Avis as they walked towards Menagerie Street. "He's right. It's the best time to set out," said Melinda, "before the wind gets up." "Before the sun gets up," said Avis, who had only lately gone from being an early bird from discovering the joy of snuggling under blankets and falling back into a cozy extra sleep. Then she said, "I didn't know you were a teacher." "There's not a lot to know. I couldn't get work as a scientist when I graduated. Not many women could, so I tried teaching. I enjoyed the kids, but science called to me. Then I got offered a research job with Tuatara, which was pretty exciting. No one had invested the time or money into studying them properly in the olden days." Melinda had a lot more grey hair than brown and freckled spots on her hand, but Avis had never considered really how old she was. Older than her parents, maybe as old as Ms. Fleming. That wasn't really old, though. "Our team tracked Tuatara nesting behaviour and measured their growth," Melinda said. "The hardest part was finding and catching them in the dark. Later I realised, while we'd been focusing on saving the Tuatara, the skinks and geckos had been disappearing right before our eyes. People forget that Aotearoa was once filled with reptiles." "Do you think that there could have been dragons here too, in the olden days?" "Well, a giant crocodile fossil was found in Otago, and there are tales of giant lizards." "Do you mean Taniwha?" asked Avis. "No, quite different, I think. Taniwha are more mystical, spiritual creatures, but there were also tales about lizards known as narara that were like large monitor lizards. People said that they lived in the trees and sometimes could fly. Some could even become invisible." "You're kidding." "Not at all. But there's no hard evidence, no bones, just plenty of stories passed down. Avis's brain whirred. What if they're still hiding somewhere in the bush? Maybe they can camouflage, like Humbert, she suggested, jiggling her feet in a sort of dance and waving her arms to keep her balance. What if Humbert could talk to them? Calm down, honey, said Melinda. They're folklore from long, long ago. So are our dragons. They arrived back at Melinda's, and Avis joined a video call with her mum, Bruno, and her dad, Ralph, all sitting side by side on a white sofa in Australia. It was strange seeing her parents sit together. Her mum's baby bump was obvious, and Avis imagined that the white sofa would not be so white once the baby started crawling around with Vegemite on its fingers. Her mum's boyfriend Aaron politely said hi, then disappeared with an excuse that he needed to work on the game plan for tomorrow's rugby game. Avis caught Bruno's eye roll and figured that things between Bruno and Aaron were not all plain sailing. Bruno said his new school year was okay, but it was tricky starting near the end of the year. He reckoned he'd done pretty well in the entrance test, though, and had volunteered to work at the school radio station. He asked Avis what she'd been doing, but she couldn't tell him about flying out to sea on Humbert or the planned trip to Makanui Island in front of her mum. Just the usual stuff, she said, hanging out at Melinda's place. Dad and Bruno would know that meant dragons. And going to school. My class is going sailing next week. Bruno laughed. How's that going to go, Avi Butt? Last time you went out on a boat, you spewed the whole time. Both parents laughed, but Avis couldn't recall the event at all. She'd only been 4 or 5 years old. Her dad said that he was flying back to New Zealand tomorrow and would spend Saturday night in Auckland with his good mate Stu before coming home on Sunday. Avis's mum shook her head. She'd always said Stu was a bad influence. Don't do anything silly, said Avis. I'm working on it, he said, and for some reason the others laughed. When the call was over, Avis pulled on her puffer jacket and went to sit with Humbert between the rhododendrons. Curled into the space between his front legs, Avis felt warm and safe and protected, but her tummy was still worried, especially about what Drake Snelling might say or do next. I have ancestral memories of dragons frightening away whole villages of people by swooping in and breathing fire, Humbert's voice rumbled. I could scare his family so they move away. That wouldn't work nowadays. They'd just call in the army and the media, and then pictures of you would go viral and you'd be on the cover of dumb magazines and people would try to capture you. At least you punched that boy. He'll be scared off now. I only made things worse. Now no one will want to be my friend. I thought I was your friend. You can have more than one friend. That's not necessary, said Humbert. I'll get this friendship thing sorted. I've already mastered wise counsel. Next thing is encouragement, like what you did for me when I was learning to surf. I'm going to work on that next. Okay, said Avis. You're going to be fine on this boat trip. You won't get seasick at all, said Humbert. Avis thought about the waves going up and down. Thrum, thrum. Who is that? Avis and Humbert said at the exact same time. Jinx, said Avis, and then had to explain to Humbert how Jinx worked. Avis vomited over the side of the boat until there was nothing left in her stomach except air and thin, bitter liquid. Melinda had woken up at 5 a.m. and insisted on feeding her a bowl of porridge with a warm mug of Milo to get her going. That had all gone within minutes of Noah's Ark setting out across the slight swell of the harbour. She'd been watching the thin line of the horizon when the first wave of nausea had hit her. Now the sun was a half circle and the ocean ahead of them was coated with a sheen of mandarin light. Noah, Papaloo and Melinda were at the wheel, discussing the best course through the reef to Makanui Island. Lulu was sorting fishing gear on one of the box seats. Her thick hair fell in one long plait down her back, under a green baseball cap. She looked at ease on the rocking boat. Avis sat on the floor, slumped against the smooth aluminum side. The thrum of the boat's motor shuddered through the life jacket she was wearing and along her spine. It was joined by a different vibration. Thrum, thrum, thrum. She grasped the dragon's tear. Lulu tapped Avis on the shoulder and handed her a bottle of ginger ale. Take small sips, she said, and come sit up front. If you look ahead, you'll feel better. Avis took the cold bottle, slippery from the chili bin full of ice. Mrs. Papaloo, Auntie Margie, packed us plenty of treats for the day, said Lulu. I don't think I could eat anything, said Avis, feeling ill again at the thought of food. Lulu helped her to stand and placed a steadying arm around her as she teetered with the movement of the boat. "You'll feel okay once you get used to it." Avis knew it was meant kindly, but she didn't believe it. How could anyone get used to this weird feeling? "Why don't the both of you come up front?" said Mr. Papaloo. Melinda made way for Avis as she slid in beside the captain's seat. Lulu switched places with Mr. Papaloo and took the wheel, her hands resting lightly on it, her eyes scanning the ocean ahead. Avis was impressed. She took a tiny sip of the ginger ale and rolled the sweet spiciness around her mouth before swallowing. Fizzy sweetness raced around her empty gut. "Is it working?" asked Lulu. Avis nodded. A stirring of hope bubbled in her tummy with the ginger ale. She took another sip. "Maybe Lulu will become my friend," she thought. "Look at that sunrise," Lulu said. "The colours are magical." Melinda would say it's not magic and give you a scientific explanation. Melinda laughed. "You know me so well," she said. "It's called the scattering phenomenon." "She was always trying to get us to learn big words when she was my teacher," said Mr. Papaloo. "So many big words I learned that year, like amnesia. I've forgotten the rest." His gorgeous laugh spread through everyone on the boat. Even Avis managed a chuckle and then burped. Melinda continued. "The scattering phenomenon occurs when the sun is low on the horizon, at sunrise and sunset, when it shines through more atmosphere than during the day. Small particles in the atmosphere scatter in the direction of the light rays. The short wavelength of blues and violets mean that they get scattered further, which allows red and oranges and yellows to reach our eyes." "That sounds pretty magical to me," Lulu said. "See, Avis, I told you so," said Melinda. "Science can explain the mysteries of the world and still leave them fascinating." "Then explain why I'm seasick," said Avis. "That's easy. There's a mismatch of information being received by your brain. Your eyes and feet tell your brain that you're not moving, but your inner ear senses motion. Your brain's confused. If you distract your brain, you'll feel better. I bet you haven't been feeling sick in the last few minutes." It was true. Since sipping the ginger ale and listening to the science lesson, she hadn't felt the slightest bit sick. Mr. Papaloo turned his sonar fish finder on. "This can distract you too," he said. Avis watched the screen as shoals of small cartoon fish flitted across it, while Mr. Papaloo prepared the fishing gear, and Melinda rechecked the contents of her pack. Lulu kept her hands on the steering wheel and told Avis stories about growing up on a yacht, sailing with her parents from Pacific Island to Pacific Island. She talked about seeing pygmy killer whales near Tuvalu and humpbacks nursing off their young in the coast of Niue. "It sounds wonderful," said Avis, and the way Lulu's eyes shone and her voice lifted as she talked, Avis knew it must have been. "But living on a boat would be my worst nightmare." "We didn't do it out of choice," said Lulu. "Our home island—" She was cut off as Mr. Papaloo called out, "Talofa Makonui." Avis thought the dark shape on the horizon looked like a surfacing whale, with one low hill like a tail and one long hill like the body. "The local people have a legend that one of their finest fishermen once hauled up an enormous sea monster," said Mr. Papaloo, "and vowed never to harm the monster or its family, then let it go. The next morning the fisherman was rocked by a huge wave and saw this island rise from the sea. The people declared it the monster's reminder of the fisherman's promise, and the island became a sacred place. Some people say it looks like a whale rising from the water." "That's what I was thinking," said Avis. She liked the myth, even though she knew Melinda wouldn't. How could science possibly explain a whole island appearing overnight? With a hidden reef to avoid and narrow channels to navigate, approaching the island was tricky. Mr. Papaloo took over the steering. Avis joined Lulu on the side, keeping an eye out for the rocks. "I think my brain is handling the mixed messages better now," she said. "Great," Lulu replied. "We'll make a sailor out of you yet." The island was covered in shrubs and trees, all shades of green, and the air was filled with birdsong. The loudest of the morning chorus came from the peninsula, which was the tail of the whale. At the part of the island Melinda said was fenced and predator-free. The jetty jutted out of a muddy stretch between the peninsula and the main island. It tilted on uneven piles. Melinda pointed out the roof of the hut, hidden among the trees beyond the jetty. The real estate agent had given her the key. "Welcome to paradise," said Melinda. Why wouldn't everyone want to live here, Avis thought. Surely such a beautiful place would be worth millions and millions of dollars. There was no way Melinda could afford to buy it. She clambered onto the jetty after Melinda, and they waved goodbye to Lulu and Mr. Papaloo, who putted off to fish on the edge of the trench on the far side of the island. "We'll be back to have lunch together at about 1, Mr. Papaloo called, "with our bins full of fish." He looked up at the sky. "The wind's going to change, so we can't be too long." "What's that stink?" Avis asked, screwing up her nose. Something smelled as if 100 cats had vomited their fish dinners under the bed, and then 200 dogs had pooed all over the carpet. "Penguins," said Melinda. "It's a penguin colony." Avis looked around, hopeful to see the creatures she always thought was so cute. Maybe less cute now that she knew they stank. Paradise had a defect. "They'll be out at sea," said Melinda. "They come back to the island to roost at night." Avis followed Melinda over the slippery mud and rocks, where they encountered the island's second defect. A cloud of sandflies swarmed their bare skin. Melinda dropped her backpack and swatted furiously as she scrabbled through the bag to locate a spray of bottle bug repellent. Sharp teeth pierced Avis's arms, legs, and neck. One bit her cheek before she squashed it into a smear of blood and black legs. "Quick, honey, put your sweatshirt on." Avis untied it from her waist and pulled it over her head, but when her head popped out, her open mouth filled with tiny bugs. She spat them out. Melinda sprayed the cool repellent over Avis's bare legs and onto her hands so she could spread it across her neck and face. The raw bite wounds stung. "Now run," said Avis. With her mouth firmly closed this time, Avis raced Melinda to the hut. Melinda unlatched a door in the fine wire mesh of the surrounding veranda, and they dived in, followed by 20 or 30 of the tiny bloodsuckers, before Melinda slammed the door. They clapped their hands a few times, reducing the number of attackers to a dozen or so, which retreated to the far corners of the room. Melinda and Avis sat on the veranda in 2 rickety old armchairs, marvelling through the mesh at the beauty around them. "Welcome to paradise," said Avis sarcastically, itching the red lumps rising on her arms and neck. "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven," Melinda quoted. "What does that even mean?" asked Avis. "You choose how to see things," said Melinda. "And I'm doing my best to think positively." "Maybe dragons eat sandflies," said Avis. Melinda didn't spend too long inside exploring the hut. It was dry and in reasonable repair, with 1 big room for a kitchen and dining, with 2 bunk rooms. Along the back was a storage room with a wash tub and a stack of predator traps. The current owners had intended to turn the island into a bird sanctuary, but when they tried to get volunteers to run the place, no one had stayed for long. "I don't blame them," said Avis, scratching at the bite on her cheeks. "How can things so small cause so much pain with a single bite?" "It's not a clean bite," said Melinda. "They tear at the hole with their saw-like mandibles to make it deeper and wider so they can get more blood." "Gross," said Avis. "Everything fights to survive," said Melinda. The storage room also held a row of yellow safety helmets hanging on hooks. Mosquito netting had been glued to each helmet so it draped over the faces, necks, and shoulders. There was also an assortment of gloves. Melinda had packed thermal leggings for both of them in case it got colder later in the day, so when they put these on, under their shorts, and tucked the cuffs into their socks, there was nowhere the sandfly's sharp mandibles could get in easily. "First, I want to check the predator-proof fencing, just to make sure the lizards will be safe here. Then we need to find a spot that we can clear for Humber and Princess to land and take off." Melinda's eyes were doing that twinkly, wrinkly thing, as if her mind was leaping with all sorts of questions she wanted to find the answer to. Avis felt the same, but first... "Have you seen the loo?" she asked, looking about. Melinda pointed through the back window to a gravel path behind the hut. The loo was a long drop toilet. It hadn't been used for a while, and some spiders had taken up residence. Thick, complex webs were woven across the corners of the room, and even across the toilet seat. Avis used a stick to clear them and sat gingerly. On the back of the door was a handwritten sign. Makonui Island Survival Tips. 1. Stay indoors. 2. If you do go outside, beware of stinky penguin poo, savage sandflies, prickly plants, demented wild turkeys, and the monster of Mako Cove. 3. Leave as soon as possible. 4. Never return. As she and Melinda made their way across the island, Avis kept her eyes open for demented turkeys. She hoped it was a joke like the monster of Mako Cove, except the penguins and sandflies had been accurate. Melinda and Avis followed a narrow stony path to the gates through the predator-proof fence. Along both sides of the path, tangled plants with sharp thorns jabbed Avis through her clothing. "Prickly plants," she said, remembering the sign. "Matagori," said Melinda. She removed a machete from the leather sheath in her backpack, as casually as a person might pull out a drink bottle, and bared the blade, slashing at the branches that blocked their way, slicing cleanly through the wooden stems. At the narrowest point of the island, where the whale's tail joined its body, there was a small stretch of dry sand and tussock. "This will be the perfect place for a dragon landing site," said Avis. The sand would make for a soft landing." "No good for a plane or a helicopter, but perfectly suitable for dragons," Melinda said. "We'd still need to make tracks through the bush for them so they could hunt." Melinda brandished her machete a little too energetically, and Avis ducked. "They could burn tracks. Princess would need to learn to control her flame if she could practice," said Avis. Melinda had been reluctant to let the younger dragon play with fire in the backyard, and while Humbert had learned good control, fire was tricky. "Maybe," she said. "A possibility." The further they got from the jetty, the fewer sandflies followed them. When Melinda removed her helmet and netting, Avis did the same. "Sandflies prefer penguin blood," said Melinda. "They'll stay nearer to their guaranteed supply." Avis gazed around the lush green bush, the blue of the sea and the gold of the sand, and the black of the stones beneath her feet. She picked up a stone and was surprised at how light it was. It was full of tiny air bubble holes. Away from the stinky penguins, sandflies and prickly plants, Avis thought the island was paradise. The entrance to the predator-proof peninsula was through 2 spring-loaded gates with a small cage, like an airlock, between them. The fence that crossed the narrowest point between the main island and the peninsula was dug deep into the sandy soil and had a curve and spikes over the top. "That's to prevent rats from swimming around the fence at low tide," Melinda explained, indicating how the fence line stretched into the sea. "It looks promising." The gate snapped shut behind Melinda and Avis, and they followed the dirt path to the far side of the peninsula. "This looks very promising," said Melinda again, pointing out a dry outcrop of lichen-covered rock. "The fencing is secure and there's plenty of cover. The lizards could soak up some sun here." "You love those lizards, don't you?" said Avis. "I am their mother." Melinda opened her eyes wide and flicked out her tongue. Avis knew this joke, but it unsettled her. The view from the top of the peninsula trail was spectacular. Looking back to the main body of the island, the high cliffs, striated in black and browns and rusty reds, dropped directly into the blue water. Further out, the water changed from the deepest of greens, which must have been the deep trench off the island, Avis thought. It was this trench that attracted the oil drillers. She could see the silvery dot of Mr. Papalou's boat rounding the cliffs, heading into the green expanse, a white wake trailing behind. "There's your drilling rig, honey," said Melinda, stepping up on the rock and pointing towards the black object on the far side of the trench. "Not mine," said Avis. Thrum. Avis stumbled, a wave of nausea washing over her. She stepped closer to the cliff. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The vibrations were stronger than ever. Avis's belly churned. She reached for the dragon's tear, dropping her helmet with the mosquito netting, barely registering its tumble over the cliff edge. A cloud of gulls rose and flew, squawking. "Avis, get away from the edge!" Melinda grabbed her around the chest and pulled her back. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Avis pointed to the green water where concentric circles of ripples were forming. "What?" Melinda stopped, unable to find an explanation for what they were seeing. She dragged Avis further away from the cliff. Avis struggled out of her grip and tipped her dragon's tear out of its bag and into her palm. It shimmered with waves of blue and purple and deep crimson. "Someone else is using your frequency?" Melinda leaned closer to look. "Who?" Avis wondered. "Dolphins? Mermaids?" The monster of Mako Cove? She looked at the ripples on the ocean surface. Please let it be mermaids. If dragons are real, why can't mermaids be too? As she watched, the water surged again. The circle separated and grew wider. In the middle of the disturbance, bubbles rose to the surface. Something near the trench was displacing the water and forming a wave. Something not dolphins. Something not mermaids. Avis could see 2 figures standing at the front of Mr. Papaloo's motorboat. She watched the swell of water surge towards them. It was going to hit them, side on, lift them, tip them, maybe smash them against the foot of the cliffs. We have to help them, Avis cried to Melinda, running down the path towards the gates. If Humbert had been there, Avis would have flown to the rescue, but Humbert was far away and her new friend was about to be drowned. She saw the boat turn sharply. Now the wave was behind it. They were racing, riding the swell away from the island, further out to sea. A new movement in the deep green water drew their attention. From the depths of the trench emerged a shape, long and slippery, patched a deep red and purple, a shape that moved like a wave, and it was hard to pinpoint, appearing first in one place, then another, then many places at the same time. Thrum, Avis, I am their mother. Thrum, what are you doing? Thrum, stop them. The dragon tear in Avis's hand shimmered. It flashed with peacock feather colours, then went dark. She felt it dragging her down. Avis clenched her hand over the images in the crystal and looked back at the sea, where slippery crimson shapes rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell, then didn't reappear. The waves, dashed wide against the cliffs, slowed and still. In the distance, a silvery dot putted away around the far end of the island, a white wake trail trailing behind. They're safe, said Avis, letting out a long breath. She looked at Melinda. It was the palest white, and she looked as if dark shadows had been painted beneath her eyes and sucked the meat from her cheeks. The sort of look, Avis thought, that made people ask, "Have you seen a ghost?" They hadn't seen a ghost. What kind of creature was that? Avis asked quietly, certain that Melinda, who knew everything, would know the answer to this. Melinda shook her head. She had no scientific explanation to offer. Her eyes had lost their twinkle. Her answer croaked from her lips. Kraken. And that wraps up today's tale on Spin Me a Tale. But don't wander too far. Join me next Saturday at 9:30 a.m. on Plains Media, broadcasting on 96.9 FM for the next episode in our journey. If you want to relive the magic, all past episodes are waiting at plains.org.nz. Let your imagination stay wide awake.